When a father walked onto that stage, no one knew what had happened backstage. Not the audience. Not the other judges. Not even the producers watching from the control room. But Simon Cowell was about to hear something that would stop him cold, leave him speechless, and change the way he saw everything standing in front of him that night. The America's Got Talent stage was buzzing with its usual pre-performance energy. Bright lights. Cameras positioned at every angle. The audience settling into their seats, programs in hand, ready for another night of talent, dreams, and the occasional surprise. Simon sat at the judges' table, arms crossed, that familiar expression on his face. The one that said he'd seen it all. The one that silently warned every contestant, impress me, or don't waste my time. But tonight was different. Tonight something was about to crack through that armor. The stage lights dimmed slightly as the next act was announced. A man in his mid-40s walked out from the wings. He wasn't flashy. No costume. No dramatic entrance. Just a regular guy in jeans and a simple button-up shirt, holding a microphone like it weighed more than it should. His name was David. And he wasn't there to sing, dance, or juggle. He was there to tell a story. Simon leaned forward slightly. His instincts told him this wasn't going to be a typical audition. David stood center stage, under the spotlight, and took a breath. The kind of breath you take when you're about to say something that's been sitting heavy on your chest for too long. He looked out at the audience, then at the judges, and finally, his eyes landed on Simon. "I'm not here to perform," David said, his voice steady but quiet. "I'm here because of my son." The audience went silent. Simon's expression didn't change, but his posture did. He sat up straighter, listening. But what happened next, no one in that theater could have predicted. David continued. 3 weeks ago, my son was supposed to be here. He was supposed to stand on this stage and sing. It was his dream. He'd been practicing for months. Every night after school, every weekend. He wanted to make it to this show more than anything in the world. Simon's eyes stayed locked on David. No interruption. No joke. No trademark sarcasm. Just silence. But 2 weeks before the audition, David's voice cracked slightly. My son was diagnosed with leukemia. The air in the room shifted. You could feel it. The collective intake of breath from the audience. The way the other judges froze. And Simon, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched. David wiped his eyes quickly, trying to keep it together. He's in the hospital right now. He can't be here. But before they took him for his first treatment, he made me promise something. He paused, swallowing hard. He made me promise I'd come here. That I'd stand on this stage. That I'd tell his story. Because even if he couldn't sing tonight, he wanted someone to know that he tried. That he didn't give up. Subscribe now, because what Simon does next will leave you speechless. Simon's hand slowly moved to his face. He covered his mouth. His jaw tightened. For a man known for his sharp words and brutal honesty, he had none. Not a single one. He just sat there, staring at this father who had walked onto the most public stage in America to honor a promise to his son. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands were shaking. This is a letter my son wrote. He asked me to read it if I made it here. He unfolded the paper carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the world. And maybe in that moment it was. Dear Simon. David read aloud, his voice breaking. I know you don't know me. But I've watched you for years. I've seen you be tough on people. I've seen you be honest when no one else would. And I've always thought, if I ever got to stand in front of you, I'd want to earn your respect. Not your pity. So even though I can't be there, I wanted you to know that I didn't quit. I'm still fighting. And maybe one day, if I beat this, I'll come back. And I'll sing for you. For real this time. The letter ended there. David folded it back up, hands trembling, and looked at Simon again. That's all he wanted me to say. The silence that followed was deafening. Simon Cowell, the man who had critiqued thousands of performances, who had built a career on being unshakable, sat frozen. His eyes were red. His hand still pressed against his mouth, as if holding back words that couldn't form. And then, slowly, he stood up. The audience gasped. The other judges turned to look at him. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't part of the show. But Simon didn't care. He walked around the judges' table. Past the cameras. Across the stage floor, his footsteps echoing in the silence. And he stopped right in front of David. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Simon looked at this father, this man who had honored his son's dream by showing up when his son couldn't. And then Simon did something no one expected. He reached out and hugged him. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one. The kind that says, I see you. I hear you. And I'm sorry this is happening. When Simon finally stepped back, his voice was quiet. Rough. What's your son's name? Ethan, David said, barely able to get the word out. Simon nodded. He looked down for a second, composing himself, and then back up at David. Ethan's story is going to be told. Not just here. Everywhere. And when he's ready, when he beats this, you tell him Simon Cowell is waiting. He gets a spot. No audition. No questions. He walks onto this stage, and he sings. The audience erupted. Standing ovation. Tears. Applause that didn't stop. The other judges were on their feet. Howie had his hand over his heart. Heidi was openly crying. Sophia was clapping with both hands raised. But Simon didn't move. He just stood there with David, hand on his shoulder, nodding slowly as if making a silent vow. And then, something even more extraordinary happened. Simon walked over to the judges' table and pressed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling. The crowd went wild. But Simon didn't smile. Didn't wave. He just stood there, watching the confetti fall, and then turned back to David. That's not for the audition, Simon said, voice breaking slightly. That's for Ethan. That's for his fight. That's for not giving up. David couldn't hold it together anymore. He broke down. Right there on stage, in front of millions of people watching live and at home. And Simon didn't rush him. Didn't tell him to pull it together. He just stood beside him, letting him feel it. Backstage, producers were scrambling. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. But no one stopped it. Because everyone watching knew they were witnessing something real. Something that transcended television. When David finally composed himself enough to speak, he looked at Simon and said, Thank you. You have no idea what this means to him. To us. Simon shook his head. No. Thank you. For reminding all of us what courage really looks like. David walked off the stage to another wave of applause. But Simon didn't sit back down right away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the empty stage where David had just been. The cameras caught it all. The way his shoulders dropped. The way he took a deep breath, like he was carrying something heavier now than he had been an hour ago. When the show went to commercial break, Simon walked backstage. No one followed him. He found a quiet corner, away from the crew, away from the cameras. And for the first time in years, Simon Cowell let himself sit in the weight of what he'd just heard. A producer approached cautiously. Simon, that was incredible. The footage is going to be everywhere. Simon didn't respond right away. He just nodded, still processing. And then, quietly, he said, Get me his contact information. I want updates. I want to know how Ethan's doing. The producer blinked, surprised. You want personal updates? Yes, Simon said, voice firm now. Every week. I don't care if it's through the show or privately. I want to know. And he meant it. Over the following weeks, Simon did something he'd never done before. He stayed connected. He sent messages through the production team to Ethan's family. He checked in on treatment progress. He even arranged for the show to cover some of the medical expenses quietly, without fanfare, without press releases. Just because it was the right thing to do. When clips of that night aired, the video went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. People from all over the world sharing their own stories of loss, of fight, of love. And at the center of it all was Simon Cowell, the man everyone thought had a heart of stone, showing the world that sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is care. 3 months later, Ethan's family sent an update. He was responding to treatment. The prognosis was improving. And he wanted Simon to know that he was still practicing. Still dreaming. Still fighting. Simon read the message backstage before a taping. He didn't cry this time. But he smiled. A real smile. The kind that says, "Good. Keep fighting, kid." That night, before the show started, Simon walked out onto the empty stage. Just him. No cameras. No audience. He stood in the same spot where David had stood months earlier and looked out at the rows of empty seats. And he made a promise. Not out loud. But to himself. If Ethan made it back, Simon would make sure the world heard him sing. Not because of the story. Not because of the sympathy. But because that kid had earned it. He'd fought for it. And Simon Cowell didn't forget promises like that. Because that night Simon Cowell didn't just hear a story. He became part of one. The episode became one of the most watched in AGT history. It was replayed on talk shows, shared across social media, and referenced in interviews for years. People didn't just remember the golden buzzer. They remembered the moment Simon Cowell stopped being a judge and became human. And somewhere, in a hospital room, a boy named Ethan watched the footage on a tablet, tears streaming down his face, knowing that even though he couldn't be there, his story had been told. His fight had been seen. And Simon Cowell was waiting for him. Months passed. The season continued. Other acts came and went. Golden buzzers were pressed for incredible singers, jaw-dropping dancers, and acts that defied belief. But backstage, in Simon's dressing room, there was a photo taped to his mirror. A photo David had sent him. It was Ethan, sitting in his hospital bed, wearing an AGT t-shirt, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Thin. Pale. But smiling. Simon looked at that photo every single day before he walked onto that stage. It became his reminder. His anchor. The reason he pushed acts harder, demanded more, and refused to settle for anything less than extraordinary. Because somewhere out there, a kid was fighting just for the chance to stand where these people already were. One evening, after a particularly long day of auditions, Simon sat alone in the empty theater. The crew had gone home. The lights were dimmed. He walked onto the stage, just as he had done before, and stood in the center. He thought about David. About Ethan. About that letter. And he realized something. This wasn't just Ethan's fight anymore. It was everyone's. Every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. Every dreamer who faced impossible odds. Every family sitting in a hospital room, holding on to hope when hope felt impossible. Simon pulled out his phone and sent a text to the production team. "I want to do something for pediatric cancer research. Set up a fund. Use my name. I don't care about the publicity. Just make it happen." Within weeks, the Simon Cowell Foundation for Pediatric Cancer was established. It wasn't announced with press conferences or red carpets. It was quiet. Purposeful. And it started because one father had the courage to walk onto a stage and tell a story. Back in the hospital, Ethan's condition continued to improve. His hair started growing back. His strength returned. And one day, his doctor walked into the room with news that made his parents cry tears of joy. Ethan was in remission. David immediately called the AGT production office. The message was simple. "Tell Simon. Ethan's ready." When Simon got the call, he was in the middle of a meeting. He stood up, excused himself, and walked into the hallway. He read the message 3 times, just to make sure it was real. And then, for the second time in his career, Simon Cowell cried. 2 months later, on the season finale of America's Got Talent, something unprecedented happened. Simon walked onto the stage before the show started and addressed the audience directly. "Before we begin tonight," Simon said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I need to tell you about someone. His name is Ethan. And tonight, he's going to sing." The audience erupted in applause, even though they didn't yet understand why. But they would. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the stage. And from the wings, a young boy walked out. He was wearing a suit. His hair had grown back, slightly uneven, but there. And in his hand, he held a microphone. Ethan looked out at the audience, then at the judges, and finally at Simon. Their eyes met. And Simon nodded. Just once. But it said everything. Ethan began to sing. His voice was clear. Strong. Filled with a maturity that only comes from facing something most people never have to face. He sang about hope. About fighting. About never giving up. And when he finished, the audience didn't just applaud. They roared. Simon stood up, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He walked onto that stage, and he hugged Ethan. Held him. And whispered something in his ear that the cameras didn't catch. But Ethan smiled. A real, genuine smile. The kind that says, "I made it. I'm here." Later, when reporters asked Simon what he had said to Ethan in that moment, Simon simply replied, "I told him I was proud of him. And that he reminded me why I do this." That night became legendary. Not because of a golden buzzer. Not because of a viral moment. But because it was real. Raw. Human. And it showed the world that Simon Cowell wasn't just a judge. He was someone who cared. Deeply. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe so that powerful moments like this are never forgotten. Because sometimes, the greatest performances aren't about talent. They're about heart. And heart is something that can never be judged.